Imagine a region rich in resources and surrounded by vast deserts where two powerful nations lay claim to the same land. A place where a decades-long conflict has left hundreds of thousands of people displaced, and the fate of its future hangs in the balance. This is Western Sahara, a forgotten war, an unresolved dispute, and a story that most of us don't know. But why is this region still a flashpoint even after so many years? In today's video, we are diving deep into the history, the political drama, and the human struggle that has shaped one of the most contentious conflicts of our time. Why has peace been so elusive? And who's truly in control of this desert land? Stay tuned, because what you'll discover might just surprise you. The story of Western Sahara begins in 1884, when Spain officially claimed the region as its protectorate. Spain's reasons for colonizing Western Sahara were straightforward: access to valuable maritime routes, rich resources, and the desire to expand its diminishing empire. Life in Spanish Sahara, as it was known, resembled life in other European colonies in Africa. The Spanish extracted taxes, exploited the locals, and plundered the land's resources. Occasionally, they also suppressed uprisings to maintain control. However, things began to change in the 1960s. Across Africa, colonized peoples were demanding their right to independence. With each passing year, more and more African countries regained their sovereignty. The spirit of self-determination soon spread to Spanish Sahara. Inspired by the success of anti-colonial movements in other African nations, a group of Sahrawi nationalist activists formed the Polisario Front, a movement dedicated to securing Sahrawi independence. The Polisario Front launched a war of independence against the Spanish colonial authorities. They carried out guerrilla-style attacks on the colonial police and army, then quickly disappeared into the vast desert. As the years passed, the attacks escalated, and Spanish control over the territory weakened. By 1975, Spain was in a very tight position. At home, dictator Franco's health was failing, his regime was unstable, and Spain's political future appeared uncertain. Internationally, Spain faced mounting pressure over its continued colonization of Western Sahara. The war escalated daily, growing more unpopular in Spain. It seemed the end was near. Emboldened by Spain's weakness, Morocco and Mauritania demanded that Spain hand over control of Western Sahara to them. Their plan was to carve up the territory. Morocco would annex the northern two-thirds, and Mauritania would seize the southern third. This raises an important question. Why were Morocco and Mauritania so eager to carve up a fellow African nation? For Morocco, the reason was straightforward. The part of Western Sahara it claimed had been under Moroccan Sultanate rule long before Spanish colonization. It seemed only right that the territory be returned to Morocco. Mauritania offered similar reasons for their claim. The people in Mauritania's portion of Western Sahara had deep cultural ties with Mauritania's nomadic communities in the north. Given this connection, it made sense for Mauritania to claim the territory and incorporate it into their country. The Sahrawis, however, preferred an independent state. They did not want to be absorbed by either Morocco or Mauritania. The International Court of Justice sided firmly with the Sahrawis, issuing an advisory opinion that affirmed their right to self-determination and found no legal basis for Morocco and Mauritania's claims. Yet, both countries chose to ignore the ruling. In response to mounting pressure, Morocco orchestrated the Green March in 1975. This mass demonstration, involving over 350,000 Moroccan civilians, was designed to force Spain to cede control of Western Sahara. Marchers crossed the border into the Western Sahara, applying immense pressure on Spain to negotiate. Faced with this unprecedented show of strength, Spain had little choice but to negotiate. The result was the Madrid Accords, signed in November 1975. Under the terms of the agreement, Spain agreed to withdraw from Western Sahara and cede control to both Morocco and Mauritania. According to the deal, Morocco would occupy the northern two-thirds of the territory, while Mauritania would control the southern third. Shortly after the Madrid Accords were signed, Moroccan and Mauritanian troops moved into their respective zones of occupation, solidifying their control over the land. However, the Sahrawis saw the Madrid Accords as a betrayal. The Polisario Front, the Sahrawi nationalist movement, had long fought for their own independent state and refused to accept the division of their homeland. Their resistance to both Morocco and Mauritania would soon escalate into a full-scale war. The signing of the Madrid Accords in 1975 did not bring peace to the Western Sahara. Far from it. The Polisario Front, the Sahrawi nationalist movement that had fought tirelessly for self-determination, rejected the agreement outright. To them, the accords represented a betrayal, a colonialist carve-up of their homeland that disregarded their right to independence. They refused to accept Moroccan and Mauritanian control over the territory and vowed to continue their struggle. Soon after the signing of the Madrid Accords, the Polisario Front took up arms against the occupying Moroccan and Mauritanian forces. With unwavering resolve, they launched a full-scale guerrilla war aimed at driving the invaders out. The conflict was brutal, with Polisario fighters using the harsh desert landscape to their advantage, striking swiftly and disappearing into the vast emptiness before the enemy could respond. Their tactics were effective and lethal. From the very beginning, the Polisario Front found an unlikely yet crucial ally in Algeria. Algeria, which had gained its independence from France just over a decade earlier, had long supported anti-colonial movements across Africa. With a shared ideological commitment to self-determination, Algeria began providing the Polisario Front with significant military assistance. This support included training, the establishment of rear bases in Algeria, and crucially, weapons. This assistance bolstered the Polisario's capacity to wage war, leveling the playing field against the more well-equipped Moroccan and Mauritanian armies. The war quickly became a test of endurance. The Moroccan and Mauritanian forces, although superior in numbers and equipment, were unfamiliar with the desert terrain and unable to effectively counter the hit-and-run tactics employed by the Polisario Front. As the years went by, the losses mounted for both Morocco and Mauritania. Despite their superior firepower, the occupying forces were unable to suppress the Sahrawi resistance. For Mauritania, the situation became untenable. The war, increasingly unpopular at home, drained the country's resources. The losses in men and material were staggering, and the morale of the Mauritanian army began to plummet. The Mauritanian public, wary of the ongoing conflict, grew disillusioned with the government's military campaign. In 1979, after suffering substantial defeats, Mauritania was forced to make a dramatic decision. In an effort to stem the tide of the war, Mauritania withdrew from the Western Sahara entirely, abandoning its territorial claims and leaving Morocco as the sole occupying power in the region. However, the intensity of the war did not abate. Even after Mauritania's withdrawal, the conflict continued to rage. With Morocco now in full control of the Western Sahara, it found itself in a prolonged and bloody battle with the Polisario Front, which had no intention of giving up its fight for independence. The guerrilla warfare continued, and the losses on both sides mounted. The Moroccan government, under increasing pressure, was forced to commit more and more resources to the conflict. At its peak, Morocco had nearly 100,000 troops deployed in Western Sahara, trying to maintain control over the vast desert territory. But as the war wore on, Morocco began to adapt to the Polisario Frant's guerrilla tactics. The desert landscape, ideal for ambushes and swift strikes, had proven difficult for Morocco to control. To address this challenge, Morocco began constructing the BEM, a massive 2,000-kilometer-long defensive wall designed to secure Moroccan-controlled territory. The BEM was built with the help of South African, French, and American experts, and it became the centerpiece of Morocco's strategy to defend its claims to Western Sahara. The wall, made of sand, rock, and reinforced with barbed wire, divided the desert into two. It effectively encircled Morocco's portion of Western Sahara, creating a defensive barrier that made it more difficult for the Polisario to launch attacks. It also served as a tool for controlling the movement of Sahrawi civilians and limiting access to key resources. The BEM allowed Morocco to secure and fortify its hold over the territory it had claimed, but it also marked the transformation of the conflict into a more static and entrenched war. Despite the strategic advantages that the BEM provided, the war remained far from over. The Polisario Front, while now facing a formidable barrier, continued to wage a determined resistance. The fight for Western Sahara, as the world would come to know, was far from its conclusion. By 1991, the war for Western Sahara had reached an impasse. Both Morocco and the Polisario Front found themselves locked in a conflict with no clear victor in sight. The intensity of the fighting had diminished in some areas, but the war still raged on, with neither side willing to concede defeat. The brutal guerrilla warfare tactics of the Polisario Front had inflicted significant losses on Moroccan forces, while the BEM and Morocco's military might were unable to stamp out the Sahrawi resistance entirely. The toll on both sides was mounting. Morocco, despite its military superiority, had been forced to commit nearly 100,000 troops to the conflict, a significant portion of its military resources. The prolonged war was proving increasingly costly. Economically, the financial burden of maintaining a military presence was straining Morocco's budget. The war was also starting to take its toll diplomatically, particularly with African nations. The African Union, which had consistently supported the right to self-determination of the Sahrawi people, was becoming more and more vocal in its calls for a peaceful resolution. Morocco's relationship with the continent, especially in terms of trade and diplomatic relations, was being damaged by its ongoing occupation of Western Sahara. For the Polisario Front, the cost of war was equally devastating. While they had continued their resistance, they too faced mounting losses. The harsh desert environment and the relentless nature of the conflict had displaced tens of thousands of Sahrawi civilians. These refugees sought shelter in camps in Algeria, where they lived in squalid conditions, dependent on international humanitarian aid for their survival. The suffering of the Sahrawi people in these camps, combined with the rising number of casualties on both sides, made it clear that the war was no longer sustainable for either party. By this time, the international community had increasingly turned its attention to the conflict, urging both Morocco and the Polisario Front to find a peaceful solution. The United Nations, as well as key powers in Europe and Africa, began putting pressure on both sides to end the fighting. The long-standing conflict was seen as a destabilizing force in the region, and there was a growing consensus that a negotiated settlement was the only viable path forward. In the face of growing international pressure and the deepening toll of the war on both of their countries, Morocco and the Polisario Front agreed to enter into negotiations. The realization that neither side could achieve a definite military victory led them to the table. In 1991, a ceasefire was brokered by the United Nations and a formal peace process was initiated, with both parties agreeing to work towards a referendum on self-determination for the Sahrawi people. But there is a catch. The 1991 ceasefire did not mark the end of the conflict, but rather the beginning of a new phase in the long struggle for independence. While the guns fell silent, the political and diplomatic battle for Western Sahara was far from over. Since the 1991 ceasefire, the situation in Western Sahara has remained in a state of uncertainty, with the conflict effectively entering a prolonged stalemate. While the United Nations mission for the referendum in Western Sahara was established to oversee a referendum on self-determination for the Sahrawi people, the promised vote has never taken place. The main reason for this is the disagreement over voter eligibility. You see, Morocco insists that anyone residing in the territory, including settlers brought in from Morocco, should be allowed to vote, while the Polisario Front argues that only the indigenous Sahrawi population should have a say. This disagreement has stalled the process and prevented a resolution. Morocco, which controls about 80% of the territory, has continued to consolidate its hold on the region, actively promoting settlement programs to encourage Moroccan civilians to move into Western Sahara and strengthen the claim of Moroccan sovereignty. Despite international pressure, Morocco has shown no intent to relinquish control over the region, and it continues to promote the idea of autonomy for Western Sahara under Moroccan sovereignty as the only viable solution. Over the years, Morocco's claim to Western Sahara has gained significant recognition. In 2020, the United States under President Donald Trump officially recognized Morocco's sovereignty over the territory, marking a significant diplomatic victory for Morocco. This move, which reversed decades of US policy, was part of a broader deal that included Morocco normalizing relations with Israel. The US recognition was a major setback for the Sahrawi cause, as it signaled growing international support for Morocco's position. On the diplomatic front, the Polisario Front has shifted its focus from military resistance to international advocacy, but its efforts have had limited success in securing a resolution. Algeria, a key ally of the Polisario, continues to support the Sahrawi cause, offering diplomatic and logistical support. However, the Sahrawis' fight for independence has largely become sidelined on the world stage, with many countries opting for a wait-and-see approach or aligning with Morocco's claims for pragmatic reasons. In 2020, the Polisario Front resumed hostilities against Morocco after a break in the fighting. This was triggered by Morocco's actions in the Gueguerat region, where Morocco sought to create a new road linking the territory with Mauritania. The Polisario Front saw this as a violation of the ceasefire agreement and resumed its attacks. However, the scale of fighting has been limited, with both sides focusing on skirmishes rather than large-scale warfare. Despite these occasional flare-ups, the conflict has remained relatively contained, with neither side eager to escalate it further. While tensions have flared up from time to time, especially in areas like the Gueguerat region, the ceasefire has largely held. The refugee camps in Algeria remain home to tens of thousands of Sahrawis who fled the conflict, and their hopes of returning to their homeland have not materialized. The conditions in the camps are dire, and the lack of progress towards a resolution continues to weigh heavily on the Sahrawi people. As of today, Western Sahara remains one of the last unresolved conflicts in Africa, with Morocco firmly in control of the majority of the territory and the Polisario Front still holding out for self-determination. The future of the region remains in limbo. While international calls for negotiations continue, little progress has been made, and the Sahrawi people continue to await a resolution that, after more than 4 decades, remains elusive. The story of Western Sahara is one of political complexity, human struggle, and unresolved tensions that have lasted for decades. From the early days of Spanish colonization, through the wars, negotiations, and diplomatic shifts, the region's future remains uncertain. Despite the resilience of the Polisario Front and the long-standing international debate, Western Sahara continues to be a territory without peace or resolution. As the situation remains unresolved, the walls and tension often fades. But the question remains, how should this conflict be settled? Is self-determination the right path for the Sahrawi people? Should Morocco's sovereignty over the territory be accepted, or is there still hope for a fair and lasting solution? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the international community is doing enough to bring peace to Western Sahara? What do you think is the best way forward for the region? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video insightful, please like and subscribe for more content like this. And don't forget to share it with others who might be interested in this ongoing issue. Your support helps us to continue to explore and shed light on the world's most pressing conflicts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.